President Trump is probably the only leader on earth who recognized the need to address the root causes of this situation when he said that it was a huge mistake to pull Ukraine into NATO, and this was a mistake by Biden administration, and he wants to rectify this. Why don't you ask me about President Trump's position on Crimea? But I can quote a lot of what Europeans stated. I mentioned already Kaja Kallas and Ursula von der Leyen, who said any deal must make sure that Ukraine is stronger and that Ukraine is on top of Russia. Look, do you need negotiators who believe in this kind of logic and who don't want to look for honest balance of interest?
You mean Russia occupies and controls and will not negotiate the future of Crimea? Is that what you're saying?
Russia do not negotiate its own territory. And President Trump has his own proposals and has his own style in mentioning those proposals in his public speeches. We concentrate, as I said, on the real negotiations which President Trump supports and instructed his people to continue to engage in these negotiations. Well, the United States clearly tells us that they are interested in doing business together. We never reject business proposals provided they are based on the equal opportunities and the treatment of each other and lead to a balance of interest. We have been championing in the United Nations a legal prohibition of placing any nuclear weapons in outer space. And the United States, at least during the Biden administration, this was the case. They were categorically against it. I have been emphasizing repeatedly in relation to Ukraine, in relation to strategic relations with the United States, I have been emphasizing our readiness to seek balance of interests. And they know our position, and as I quoted Marco Rubio, he publicly said that now they better understand the Russian position and the reasons for what is going on. We only target military goals or civilian sites used by the military. President Putin expressed this for so many times, and this is not different this time as well. We never consciously target civilian sites, unlike the Zelensky regime. And regarding the ceasefire and regarding the call to stop, President Putin immediately supported President Trump's proposal a few weeks ago to establish a 30-day ceasefire, provided we do not repeat mistakes of the last 10 years, when deals were signed and then Ukraine would violate those deals with the support and with encouragement from Biden administration and from European countries. This was the fate of the deal of February 2014. Then this was the fate of the Minsk agreements, and this was the fate of the deal reached on the basis of Ukrainian proposals in Istanbul in April 2022. So President Putin said, ceasefire, yes, but we want the guarantees that the ceasefire would not be used again to beef up Ukrainian military. If you want a ceasefire just to continue supply arms to Ukraine, so what is your purpose?
Right.
You know what Kaja Kallas and what's his name, Mark Rutte said about the ceasefire
the NATO
and the
Secretary General
settlement.
and the European Union.
They bluntly stated that they can support only the deal which at the end of the day will make Ukraine stronger, would make Ukraine a victor. So if this is the purpose of the ceasefire, I don't think this is what President Trump wants. This is what Europeans, together with Zelensky, want to make out of President Trump's initiative.
Will Russia continue targeting Kyiv despite President Trump saying, Vladimir, stop?
You're not listening to me. We will continue to target the sites used by the military of Ukraine, by some mercenaries from foreign countries, and by instructors whom the Europeans officially sent to help target Russian civilian sites. If you take a look at the situation in the Kursk region of Russia, for example, there is no single military target for the last 6 months which the Ukrainians would fire at. And there was also a proposal by President Trump, immediately supported by President Putin, to have a 1 month moratorium on the attacks on energy infrastructure. We never violated this commitment of President Putin, and Ukrainians violated what Zelensky seemed to support several hundred times. And I sent to Marco Rubio and to the United Nations the list of those attacks. It's really very, very telling and eloquent. We continue our contacts with the American side on the situation in Ukraine. There are several signs that we are moving in the right direction. First of all, because President Trump is probably the only leader on earth who recognized the need to address the root causes of this situation. When he said that it was a huge mistake to pull Ukraine into NATO, and this was a mistake by Biden administration, and he wants to rectify this. And Marco Rubio expressed yesterday, I think, also the assessment that the American team now is getting a better understanding of the Russian position and of the root causes of this situation. One of these root causes, apart from NATO and creation of direct military threats to Russia just on our borders, another one is the rights of the national minorities in Ukraine. Everything Russian, media, education, culture, anything was prohibited by law in Ukraine. And to get out of this crisis, you cannot just forget about human rights. Whenever we discuss Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, anything, American negotiators put on top human rights. They have claims in this regard to China, to us, to anybody. But whenever Europeans and other Western nations speak about Ukraine, nobody can mumble the words human rights. Just nobody. On the contrary, what Ursula von der Leyen and other people in Brussels and in Europe say, that Ukraine is defending the European values. So one of these values is canceling the Russian language. Imagine if Israel canceled. Imagine if Israel canceled Arabic language in Palestine. Just imagine. Long before the request coming from Washington, we have been addressing the issue of the fate of the kids who, during the conflict, found themselves outside their homes, outside their families. Most of these kids were attending what you call it, the place where people without parents are taken. Orphanage. And as soon as we announce whatever details we have about those kids, and as soon as the parents or other relevant relatives make themselves available, they are getting the kids back. This has been the process for the last almost 3 years between the ombudsman of Russia and Ukraine. Every now and then, once in 2-3 months, we organize exchanges with Ukrainians with the help of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, who do not, make any noise about what they're doing. They just do something which we are participating in very constructive manner, bringing kids back to their parents or relatives. Well, we hear many things coming from President Trump. President Trump said that he is sick and tired of the situation in this settlement, especially yesterday when he commented the statements by Zelensky. And President Trump has his own proposals and has his own style in mentioning those proposals in his public speeches. We concentrate, as I said, on the real negotiations which President Trump supports and instructed his people to continue to engage in these negotiations. I'm sorry, the answer was a bit longish, but it's difficult to explain otherwise. Well, the president of Russia commented upon this situation. He said that we have nothing against American company, but those companies who decided to leave their business in Russia might find that their place has been occupied already by Russian or other foreign investors. And in this case, we would not make any decisions which would discriminate those who came to invest in Russia instead of Americans. If American companies would like to come to a place which is not yet occupied, if they want to propose a project, a new project, on top of the previous business ties, of course we will look into this, and if we find balance of our interests, I think it would be only natural to get into business together. Well, the United States clearly tells us that they are interested in doing business together. We never reject business proposals provided they're based on the equal opportunities and treatment of each other and lead to a balance of interest. Specific proposals which are being mentioned in the media, I cannot comment upon. This is not serious. We are not we are not acting like the people in Kyiv who talk to the world through the media, including talking to presidents of great countries.
Broadly speaking, when you look at what's happening in the battle space in Ukraine right now, analysts say about 18% of Ukrainian territory is under the control of Russian forces. U.S. intelligence says battlefield trends are in Russia's favor. So if that's the case, why should the U.S. believe Russia is serious about ending the war if everything is in your favor?
Well, we judge by the reaction of our American colleagues to what we tell them. And this is being done during negotiations. They're confidential, as any serious negotiation. And they know our position, and as I quoted Marco Rubio, he publicly said that now they better understand the Russian position and the reasons for what is going on. And he said that nobody in Washington lifted a finger to do the same, to try to understand Russia during the Biden administration. Mm-hmm. And this implies that the dialogue continues, that the dialogue is supported by the United States, and I reiterate that it is supported by the Russian Federation, and this dialogue continues. In American culture, you create expectations, and you ignite tension around those expectations. This does not help to do real politics, but in our case, as I said, we are always ready for dialogue, ready for negotiations, and we would not, begin by banking on a failure. This would be a characteristic of bad deal makers, inexperienced deal makers. Why don't you ask me about President Trump's position on Crimea?
You liked what President Trump said about Crimea yesterday when he said that it had been under Russian control since 2014?
It's not about liking or disliking. It's about the fact that he said the truth. And when
so he said something specific you liked.
When Zelensky said that this is absolutely excluded because Crimea is part of Ukraine according to the Constitution, nobody in Europe or in the States, by the way, reminded him that apart from territorial issues, the Ukrainian Constitution guarantees, I quote, the free development, the use and protection of the Russian and other national minorities' language in Ukraine. And they guarantee the development of ethnic, cultural, language, and religious identity of all peoples and national minorities in Ukraine. This is also in the Constitution, but as I mentioned already, and you decided not to go deeper into this topic, nobody in the West even mentions human rights when they demand that Ukraine defeat Russia in the battlefield.
President Trump said Crimea is not even being discussed right now.
Yes, because this is a done deal.
You mean Russia occupies and controls and will not negotiate the future of Crimea? Is that what you're saying?
Russia do not negotiate its own territory. You did not express your disappointment that the international system of diplomacy was not used for the entire duration of the Biden administration.
No, I was asking you were disappointed.
You did not mention that Europeans are really very nervous that they are being marginalized. But I can quote a lot of what Europeans stated. I mentioned already Kaja Kallas and Ursula von der Leyen, who said any deal must make sure that Ukraine is stronger and that Ukraine is on top of Russia. Look, do you need negotiators who believe in this kind of logic and who don't want to look for honest balance of interest? The Trump administration is interested in searching for a balance of interest. They sincerely want to understand better the Russian position, and they're getting this understanding. And we understand better the American position through negotiations and meetings and discussions which we have with them.
I want to ask you quickly about nuclear weapons because Russia is such a nuclear powerhouse. According to U.S. intelligence, Russia is developing a new satellite meant to carry a nuclear weapon, which would knock out other satellites and devastate the U.S. if it's used. That's in publicly published material. Does Russia intend to violate past treaties and actually put a nuclear weapon in space?
Well, before asking this question, you have to check whether this is true or not, what your military...
This is what U.S. intelligence says.
U.S. intelligence... I was listening to President Trump about his views of what is the list of achievements of U.S. intelligence, and I have my own facts on which I rely. We have been promoting for many years in the United Nations a resolution prohibiting putting any nuclear weapons into outer space. The country which is categorically against it is the United States. At the same time, the United States promotes an approach according to which they want to prohibit putting conventional weapons in outer space. And they cannot answer the question, does this mean that nuclear weapons they would be planning to move to the orbit? So my answer is very clear. We have been championing in the United Nations a legal prohibition of placing any nuclear weapons in outer space. And the United States, at least during the Biden administration, this was the case. They were categorically against it. We, once again, cannot help repeating, have been promoting for years in the United Nations a treaty, not a declaration, a treaty prohibiting placing weapons in outer space. And the United States is against it. I cannot comment about the validity of the intelligence reports, as I told you. We never received any facts which would confirm the allegations. As long as in the U.S. doctrinal documents, we are described as adversary, when the officials in Washington some time ago called us enemy. So we want to understand what Washington thinks of our relationship and whether Washington is ready for, I would emphasize once again, an equal, mutually respectful dialogue heading to finding a balance of interest. If this is the approach, everything is possible.
Minister, we are coming up on time, but just before I let you go, from everything you laid out, I haven't heard from you that Russia is willing to make any concession on anything to date.
No, my brief answer is you are wrong.
What concessions has Russia
wait
offered?
wait a second, please. I have been emphasizing repeatedly in relation to Ukraine, in relation to strategic relations with the United States, I have been emphasizing our readiness to seek balance of interests. If this is not what your station considers readiness for negotiations, then I don't know how to be even less eloquent in trying to be brief in my answers.